Hello, I'm Adam Jasser. Security in the Arctic is among the hottest topics in Europe. Our guest today is Robert Habeck, former Deputy Chancellor of Germany and Economy Minister. We're speaking to him at the Arctic Frontiers Conference in the far northern Norwegian city of Tromsø, just 2,000 kilometers from the North Pole. Minister, thank you very much for joining us.
Pleasure, thanks for having me.
So the title of your panel in which you just took part, oh, maybe not the title, but the motto was, if you're not at the table, you're on the menu. What does it mean for the Arctic?
Well, it was a side event here at the conference, but it turned out to be kind of the center debate. I would say that the world is changing. I think everyone has noticed it now after the debate about Greenland and lately the war in Ukraine still ongoing. So the old world order is gone. And
it's gone.
For me, yeah, it's gone. So I think this is, and it won't come back in the next 2 decades. This is the time I think we can oversee. And the question is what comes next. And this is now very much focused on the Arctic. And there are 2 things I think that are worth debating. The first one is that this talk about Arctic exceptionalism. So everything is, the world is going mad, but not in the high north because there's the frozen ice. This is also over. So everything is boiling over to the Arctic. But I would also say it could happen there, it could start there. As the ice is melting, now the sea routes become shippable, the access to raw materials is possible. There's a lot of power interest there. The Russians, the Chinese, the Americans, as we have seen with Greenland issues, are moving forward. And the Europeans are not really there, as it's open to debate what is the European Arctic, as the European Union is not including Norway and Iceland, they're not member of the European Union.
That may change though, because Iceland is going to hold a referendum.
So this is one outcome, could be one outcome of the debate of the last months, similar to Sweden and Finland joining NATO after the Russian invasion of Ukraine, that maybe some other countries would rethink their position towards the EU. And I wish for that. I wish that Iceland, Norway, Swiss, if I may say so, would think we have also to contribute to this union of power. But this means also that the European Union has to do better. The status quo is not an option, and this was the panel about.
But is this the end of the Arctic as a demilitarized zone, if you will?
Not necessarily, but I think learning the lesson of the past years, if we want to keep the Arctic, I mean, it was never really demilitarized, but not a zone. It was always said it's a high north, low tensions. The tensions are there now, increasing. So Greenland was heavily militarized, also in the Cold War, also in the Second World War. The Russian Northern Fleet is stationed in Murmansk. So in the Arctic, this belongs to the Arctic, it's above the polar circle. So a lot of weapon potential is there already, or has always been there, but there were always lines of communications or agreements that in a way balanced these.
And there was a lot of cooperation on climate, on science.
After Gorbachev, after the collapse of the Soviet Union, there was a lot of cooperation. Then the Ukraine war happened, and now the Russians are not at this conference. They are banned from every participation. The Chinese, on the other hand, are moving in. China is not an Arctic country, but they call themselves Arctic near country, and they are looking for access to every debate, to every research community, trying to define their interest. So, to answer your question, if we want to find a zone of power balance again, it requires the European Union, and I would also say Canada, to be an actor and not the meal on the menu. Then the other ones would tear us apart.
Right. Many analysts point to Svalbard Islands, which are not far from here. They are governed by a treaty from 1920. Norway is theoretically the sovereign, but with very limited options for, let's say, defending it. At the same time, the Russians have a forward base just 200 kilometers away, and they have already exercised for taking it over. So do you think this is the next sort of risk?
This is one potential concrete archipelago, island, group of islands where this could happen. Tensions like this could really, really fast escalate. As you rightly pointed out, the Svalbard Treaty is from 1920, and it's basically defining something that is complicated or easy if everyone is behaving well, but it's saying, well, it belongs to Norway. They have the sovereignty. This is undoubtedly the case, but members of other nations are allowed without asking Norway to do business there.
And the Russians have a presence
And
there.
business was fishery and minerals and coal mining, for example. So this is kind of, I mean, there's also debate about fishery and coal mining, but when the Svalbard Treaty was done, satellites were not invented and glass fiber cables were not there. And the question is, it should not be used for the preparation of war, the Svalbard Treaty is saying, but what about the defense? So there are lots of issues where one side or the other could easily say, this is not in line with the Svalbard Treaty.
But that's what the Russians are already saying about, for example, satellite monitoring.
Exactly. And then imagine that, I don't know, some stupid incident, someone is drunken, should happen on Svalbard, and some police officer is arresting some Russian because he did or said some silly thing, or maybe he did some kind of that the Norwegians consider as espionage, or maybe they control a fisher trawler, the Norwegians, and it turns out on the fisher trawler there's a Russian official, maybe Secret Service guy or police guy or Russian officer, and then he is arrested. And suddenly it's not about the Svalbard Treaty, then it's a question of national pride, national sovereignty, and then someone is sending troops, and then somehow you have an escalation you can't stop. And Svalbard is definitely one of the places where this could happen. And there's a reason for this, because the Russian access to the Atlantic had normally or traditionally three ways. One through the Mediterranean, now blocked due to the Ukraine war. Turkey wouldn't let the Russian ships pass. Then the Baltic Sea, more or less could easily be blocked as Sweden and Finland are now NATO members. The Baltic Sea is basically a inner NATO sea now. So the remaining pathway to the Atlantic is north of Norway. And north of Norway is between Norway and Svalbard. So for the NATO countries, for the Western countries, it's crucial that we have access at least to information, but we could also quite easily block this access to the Atlantic. And for the Russians, it's crucial that this is not going to happen, to defend their own interests. So Svalbard is, it's not only about drunken salesmen on Svalbard. There is a strategic overlapping or conflicting interest there.
Norway says that Svalbard is covered by NATO treaty,
yes,
by Article 5.
Yeah, but that's also my reading.
What does
it's
it mean?
part of the Norwegian
But what does it mean in practice if there is no NATO presence there, if the shortest way to react would be from Norway? I mean, there are no real forces that are involved in Svalbard's defense. What should be done about this?
Yeah. I don't think that the first step would be a full-scale invasion of Svalbard like Ukraine, because this is NATO territory. So my fear, if you would call it, would be more that something is happening out of something. So there's a small incident and then it escalating as the First World War broke out because of a, let's say, minor conflict or incident there. But I'm not so sure. And then the question is, of course, on the table, would NATO, and maybe NATO without the Americans, would go to war because of Svalbard? Some islands we've never been, not so many people living there. This is not the European heartland. And we had to, because it's under Article 5 of NATO, the NATO treatment, I think.
But it's also vital for satellite communications.
Because this is such a complicated question, we have all the interest that this is not going to happen. When it's happening, it's too late. Both options, letting it go and going to war, are horrible options. Both are horrible options.
So what should be done to increase deterrence?
We need, because we can't trust the Americans under the Trump government anymore, we need a European definition of a European interest zone in the Arctic. Not that we exclude others from entering the zone, but that we have clearly that we are able to defend our own interests. And when you recapture the debate about Greenland, what was striking for me was that Donald Trump was able to name a lot of interests: raw materials, defense, getting the Russian and the Chinese ships out. We need it for the Golden Dome, so sky protection. The European, and maybe also some personal interest in getting rich and building whatever Trump is trying to build, hotels or whatever. But the Europeans, especially the Danes, hadn't named any interest. They said Greenland is not for sale and it's up to the Greenlanders to decide. So you could hear in it, the interest is rules-based order. So not letting anyone take an island or some piece of land just because he can or he would like to. But this is not a hardcore interest as they could define. So and this is necessary that Europe, first of all, we have to find out what is the European Arctic, who is member of it. Norway and Iceland are not member of the European Union. We discussed that. Great Britain left the European Union. Germany and Poland are close to the Nordic countries, but not so much in the debate. This is now changing. You are here, I'm here. Greece, Bulgaria, Romania, have they really an interest in the Arctic? So how do we do this? Then secondly, what is our interest? Do we want to explore the raw materials, or do we want to keep them in the earth, including oil and gas? And these are two different answers. We want to have access, meaning we can do business with that and invite others maybe to explore it. We don't want to do that, maybe due to climate action and fight global warming. It's a different approach. And this is undecided. And if we would knew that, then we could use our also military force to protect it.
Right. I have another question. We're running out of time, but I wanted to ask you, Joschka Fischer, the iconic leader of the Green Party, your colleague, he said last week, he said, I'm no longer a pacifist, more or less, because of what Russia is doing and this old order being gone. So he said he would join the German army now if he were younger. But he also said Europe needs to develop its own independent nuclear capacity as deterrence. What's your take on this?
Well, this is a double-bind answer. This means that not every nation, not Germany, not Poland, should develop their own nuclear capacity. And this is rightly so. I think the Germans wouldn't accept it, and no other country would accept it due to our history as well. And that we need to share nuclear capacity. And I think we could start with the Brits and the French. This is of course complicated.
And the Swedes?
Well,
they used to have the capability.
They have?
They used in the 60s.
Okay. I wasn't aware of that. But this is a complicated debate, and because best to my understanding, and I debated it with Macron myself sometime, the French wouldn't let the Europeans, especially not the European Union as it is, decide about their nuclear weapons. Maybe they would take the European money, but is it really, could we imagine that a French president, and Macron is maybe the most pro-European French president we're going to see for a while, would say, okay, I give it to Europe. This is not, I can't imagine it. So it would be still French capabilities, but kind of a agreement with other countries. So what Joschka said is interesting, but this is only the beginning. This is not an answer how this really can be done. It's just pointing to a direction.
Mr. Habeck, thank you very much for speaking with us.
Thank you very much, and look up north.
Thank you for watching. This was World Talks from Tromsø in Norway.